board. Boom, there it is. Secondly, you know what I did is I actually read the whole thing, and then I just took screenshots of areas that I thought were really telling or really helpful or really different. And so what I want to do is show you some of those screenshots. Essentially, I'm giving you like the Coles notes, the Spark notes, right? The synopsis of the PDF through the lens of Trevor. And what that means is through the lens of inquiry, and how in your teaching from an inquiry stance, there are certain assessment underpinnings that the ministry is saying, wow, let's do this. Okay. Again, my kind prompt for you is jot down anything that jumps out at you as being, oh, that's different, or, oh, that's cool. You don't have to summarize all this, but through the lens of personal relevance, what jumps out at you? Okay. I'll share my screen. I think I can share my screen.
Should be able to.
Yeah, totally. There we go. And again, I'm going to show you quite a few slides. This is a nice one. This is a definition of assessment. This is a definition of assessment. And I bring this up because it's actually quite fascinating when we sit at a table and we bring up the A word, how many different definitions or understandings of assessment we really have. You know, we often talk in inquiry about having a common language, common direction. I really love that our ministry has said, when we're talking assessment, this is what we're talking about. So, you know, some things that jump out at me here, it should be formative, continuous, and collaborative, and set on agreed criteria. Oh my gosh, like as an inquiry practitioner, I, you know, want to put my party hat on there. So formative, you know, we really need to embrace the formative. You know, I often say in my work, 90% of our assessment practice should be in the formative space. It needs to be continuous, ongoing, not these like little dipsticks, you know, every 6 weeks or at the end of a unit. It should be throughout the learning, hence the formative, right? Assessment should be collaborative. Oftentimes, assessment is the sole job of the educator, and that's not the inquiry practice. That's not the inquiry space. How do we create assessment experiences that are collaborative with our scholars? You know what we should be thinking about when we read collaborative assessment? We should be thinking accurate and concise self-assessment, peer assessment, and co-assessment, right? Conferencing with kids. And then I love this notion of an agreed set of criteria. You know, when I read that, I know we've been talking about co-designing success criteria together, right? And so when the ministry says, hey, you should be co-designing success criteria with your scholars, I think, wow, these BDEC practitioners are on the right track. They're doing some of this already. So again, when I look at this definition, it's grounding us together, but it's aligned with inquiry. Formative, continuous, collaborative, co-design success criteria. Love, 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 love. Teacher assessment can help student redirect their efforts, improve proficiency, and establish learning goals. I think when I read that last statement, I just think about how the teacher assessment should inform the student as to how they can grow. And I'm going to get kind of provocative. Numbers don't do anything to tell a student how to grow, right? It tells them that they're a 6 out of 10 or they're a 70%, but it doesn't tell them how to grow from that. It's the formative, it's the anecdotal, it's the observational. Cool. So common definition, anything that jumps out at you. Obviously, I'm spoon feeding you the things that really jumped out at me. Here's some things that are really, really fantastic for us to consider. Assessment is most effective when it's formative and in the learning, it's differentiated, it's co-constructed, it's strengths-based and includes goals, and it's made visible for all partners. Like when we look at that list, think of all the things we've been working on this year, and think of all the work BDEC is engaged in to support teaching and learning. I think of learning walls. I think of thinking routines. I think of collaborative talk structures. I think of getting our students on the land as strengths first. So, you know, these 5 bullets, again, when I read this, not only did I see myself in this work, I saw BDEC in this work. Now, this is highly problematic for teachers who live in a summative heavy culture of assessment. Like, let's be frank. So as I'm lifting up the things that are like, okay, this is the direction we're going. Well, what are the stuff we're leaving behind? We're leaving behind a summative heavy culture of learning where it's just like transactionary. I assign, student does, they turn in for marks. I assign, student does, they turn in for marks. That's what we call transactionary assessment framework. This is not transactionary. This is collaborative and formative. So now what happens is we discuss and we agree on co-design success criteria, and a student begins to produce evidence towards that success criteria. And then we give them some feedback, or they self-assess, or they peer assess, or they co-assess, and then they go back to that evidence and they refine, they engage in what we call craftsmanship, where they show exceptional care for their evidence and they aim to grow from there. So it's not transactionary anymore, and it's not a summative heavy culture anymore. You can tell this conversation gets me fired up, right? It's not just the strong cup of coffee. The F word, we got to talk about the A word assessment. Now we got to talk the F word, and the F word is formative. The F word is formative. It's a really good word. Like, this is the one F word we should be saying all the time with our students. Formative assessment is powerful. Formative assessment informs and guides learning and informs and guides teaching. Whew. It's not just something for our kids, it's something for us to better support them. So some bullets here, like some teachers who are new to the F word, these are 3 bullets that really ground us in strong formative, right? What I don't want to see is, well, I engage in formative. My kids did a quiz and they got a 6 out of 10. That tells them where they're at. A 6 out of 10 is not a formative assessment. It does nothing to inform the student as to how to move on. So these 3 bullets really ground us in what some strong formative assessments could look like. And guess what we've been engaged in as well in BDEC? Really workshopping formative assessment practices, which I would really love to focus on more next year, Erica. Like, if I'm talking really clear and direct, it's like, let's get into some assessment work next year with the cohorts, okay? Supports learning during the learning process. So we're not talking transactionary. It's when learning is happening, the formative occurs. It's immediate and it's personal for the student. Dylan William is a fantastic formative voice. He actually talks a little bit about the rule of thirds with formative, meaning 1/3 of our time we give formative feedback to the entire class. 1/3 of the time we give formative feedback directly to a student, and 1/3 of the time we call on them to give each other formative feedback. That's a neat rule of thirds. Teacher to the whole group, teacher to one student, teacher gets the kids to turn and peer assess and give each other formative feedback. That dynamic is based on the belief and the reality that your students can effectively give formative feedback to one another, right? We need to teach them, coach them how to give powerful feedback. So that rule of thirds, it's a waste of time unless we've coached that, unless we've created assessment capable kids. It doesn't always need to be evaluated. So the E word, evaluate, means we give it a number, right? We give it a data point, like a percentage point. Formative feedback does not always need a number. In fact, we know that the minute we put a number on the feedback, the kids don't take the feedback. We know that to be true. Again, Dylan Williams speaks beautifully to this. He's researched it for decades. And I'm sure you've seen it. I speak to it often. We write all this feedback on a piece of writing and then we smack a number on it. The kids don't look at the feedback, they look at the number. So we need to remove the number as often as we can when we're giving feedback. Let's continue to go through some of these phrases that I think, ooh, I'd buy that phrase if it was for sale. Look at this phrase, differentiated assessment. How beautiful is that? So we often talk about differentiation in terms of scaffolding to support student learning, but do we talk about differentiating the assessment and how we can be flexible in how we assess student learning? And you know what we do? We design that with the kids. one question we ask our students, and I know many of you ask your scholars this question: if you could show me your learning in any way, how would you like to show me what you know? They choose the assessment. They choose. That's differentiated assessment. We can give them some options. We can give them some non-negotiables to choose from, but gosh, I'll share an example later on today as to how differentiated assessment was done in my classroom yesterday. I shared it on Instagram, and I just really, really appreciated the conversation and how it was differentiated. So I'll share an example later. So when I think of differentiated assessment, I really want us to embrace the notion of we are asking our students to help us design that based on their strengths and their interests. Differentiated assessment cannot always be Trevor says, you got to choose one of these 5, right? That's choice assessment. Differentiated includes student voice, them reflecting, identifying something. We can scaffold into those conversations by giving our students some choice so they become more accustomed as how they could show their learning. But in its purest form, differentiated assessment is designing it with our students. Again, 7 years ago, the ministry wasn't using language like this, right? The ministry is like trying to figure it out. They had a vision, and now they've given us a landscape for that vision, some really clear identifiers as to what we can do. Let's keep on rocking. There's a P word too. It's called proficiency. And I really appreciate this word, proficiency. They've actually given us a proficiency scale with 4 descriptors along this scale. And so now we're focusing on what we call proficiency rather than percentages, rather than grades. The focus is on proficiency. So I just want to be really clear. Nowhere in the documentation does it say we're focusing on grades. We're focusing on percentages. We're focusing on marks. It says we're focusing on proficiency. What the document says is what the ministry values, and it doesn't say we're focusing on marks. Now, in the 10 to 12 landscape here in British Columbia, we still have to give our students a percentage at the end of the semester or at the reporting period. We have to. But the rest of the reporting and the documentation is all focusing on proficiency. So we'll get into that balance soon. So for those of you who are 10 to 12 educators, we'll get into some practices that teachers engage in to report with a number and report towards proficiency. K to 9, we've gone gradeless. It's all proficiency. So no student in British Columbia is getting a mark, a letter grade, a percentage K to 9. It's all proficiency, meaning it's all language around how our students are growing towards proficiency.
And Trevor, I'll just give you NWT context. I think here 7 to 12 is grades, and 4 to 12 I think is percentages, and K to 3 is letters. Is that correct from the field? Elementaryers, like Amy and Jesse, are you guys percentages or letters?
Oh, 1 sec. Okay, go.
I'm letters in grade 6.
Okay, so I think
letters as well.
Percentages, and K to 6 is
So that gives us an idea of where we're headed, right? If we're going gradeless K to 9, I hope that feels liberating, number one. And I have to tell you, as a parent of 2 sons that have gone through this system for a number of years, we see such descriptive feedback as to where our sons are at in their learning. Every report card we get, we're like, gosh, our teachers know our kids. And that's what we want as parents. A number doesn't tell me that they know my kid. A number ranks my kid against others and causes us to live in a comparison culture of assessment. Whereas the descriptive, the anecdotal, the observational, it really paints a portrait of a learner. So when we're talking about proficiency, it supports lifelong learning, right? It values most recent evidence. This is so good. The most recent form of evidence will take precedent over every other form of evidence. So a student can not demonstrate like 5 attempts that we've given them. And on the 6th attempt, they demonstrate proficiency. We do not average those out. The most recent performance takes hold or weight over all the other ones. It also says that the moment a student demonstrates proficiency, that we don't have to reassess that, right? So let's say student 1 demonstrated proficiency the second time. Do we have to reassess for more examples of proficient? No, they've demonstrated it. They're proficient. We don't need to reassess and hit them on the head with another assessment. Whereas that other student, they haven't demonstrated it. They haven't, and all of a sudden they do. Do they get penalized because it took them longer? No. So there's no averaging out of marks. This is a big one for those of you who are engaging in percentages. There's no averaging out of marks anymore. It says that in the documentation. We do not average out marks anymore. What? Like, we don't put in a bunch of numbers and weight them differently into different categories and out comes a percentage and we feel really good about the 76.2, right? It's no, the most recent form of evidence takes precedent over every other one. Again, I'm going to show you what a grade book looks like today. I'm going to show you 2 pages from a grade book I've been tinkering with. What else do we need to see here? Again, views learning as ongoing rather than signaling that learning is done. You know, and I know that's sensible. Learning is ongoing, right? We never stop learning, but it's amazing what a grade and a percentage or a mark does to learning. It's like, no, you're done. You're a 76, learning done. So what they're doing is they're removing those structures that give the wrong message of what we value. If learning is ongoing, let's remove the things that give the message that learning is done. Let me see here. Thank you in the chat. Erica, if you can just monitor the chat, I don't want to miss anything. So if there's
No.
anything in the chat, just let me
It
know. I
was
know
just,
people are just like, yeah, letting us know what's going on in their context. But yeah, I didn't
and
see
then
it.
now
so
there
let
is
me know.
one from Rohan that just says about levels, like using levels. So you may get to that in your clarification process here.
Yeah, actually, I'd love for Rowan to clarify what he means by levels, if you don't mind, Rowan.
I was thinking about level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, which almost like it's like going from, you know, intermediate to
Right.
you know, to
Yeah.
proficiency, I guess. That's what I was referring to as levels, level
Thank
1
you.
to 4.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful that you're at where you're at now and you're not at where we were 4 years ago. If you
Okay.
can mute, if you don't mind muting, just because there's an echo. And what I mean by that, many teachers in British Columbia started to attach numbers to the proficiency scale. So what our numbers or our proficiency is that you'll be adopting, it starts at emerging, it goes to developing, it goes to proficient, and then it goes to extending. And so many teachers just naturally did a 1, 2, 3, 4. And all that was doing was the same old, same old. Kids wouldn't look at the feedback, they just look at the number. And so the ministry has clearly said the proficiency scale should be void of numbers, void of levels, void of percentages, void of letter grades. The point of the proficiency scale is not to attach numbers, it's to get descriptive and give really clear feedback on where they're at and where they need to go to next. So there were many teachers who just said, oh, I see 4 levels on the proficiency scale. I'll throw 4 numbers. And the ministry is saying, don't do that. The ministry is saying, don't. Here's another one. Proficiency at the high school level. So remember, we have to give our kids 10, 11, 12, a percentage at the end of a reporting period, right? The ministry is saying that proficient can be an A. Extending is above and beyond. Extending is like, you know, wow, your next grade level, right? Isn't that fascinating? So teachers who are, you know, in order to get extending, in order to get 90, you got to do this, this, this. It's the ministry said, no, proficient is an A. Proficient can be an A. It's fascinating. So we are in that murky water in 10, 11, 12 of having to do both, of having to do numbers and proficiency. But what they're telling us is to live in proficiency until reporting period. To live in formative until reporting period. Reporting period meaning where we have to write that number on a report card. So I think my short answer is let's not put numbers on proficiency. My short answer is let's not put numbers on proficiency. Now in British Columbia, we have four components, excuse me, to the curriculum. We have what we call the big ideas. We have the curricular competencies. We have the content standards, and then we have the core competencies. And the core competencies are these really beautiful skills our students are developing in every context. Like self-awareness is one, right? Like they're not just going to do that in English. They're going to do it in every subject area, in every learning setting. And so the heart of assessing the core competencies and reporting out on them is actually student self-assessment. The teacher doesn't tell a student, hey, you're bad at that, you're good at that. The heart of the core competencies is goal setting and student self-assessment. So many of our scholars are given, templates or reflective prompts or have a core competency portfolio. The core competencies are a space for students to reflect and self-assess. And then that looks really different depending on what district you're in. In my district at the high school level, students attach student self-assessment to the report card. So you get the formal report card, and then you get this student self-assessment of the core competencies that teachers have reviewed and attached to their report card. So again, the core competencies are rooted in self-reflection, rooted in self-assessment, and rooted in student evidencing towards those core competencies. So far, so good. I know, right? You're like, wow, Trevor, you're throwing a lot at us, right? Again, this is a 75-page PDF, and I've taken these screenshots that jump out, and we're working through them ever so briefly, right? Here's some really neat things around how we could assess. Meaning, in this new landscape, what are assessment practices we can engage in to document evidence of student growth? Have a look at these lists here. And I'm curious, like, what jumps out at you as being like an assessment practice that the ministry is saying that's okay? Or maybe you're reflecting on the way you currently assess most prominently, like most often. What bullets do you see yourself in more readily? There are some things here that I really love that I don't want to say they're innovative. They're really sensible, but they're often overlooked practices. So on the left side, strategies for gathering assessment information, interviews and conferences. Like sitting with a student one-on-one or sitting with a small group and having a conference about their learning and using that as evidence towards assessment and proficiency. That's a fantastic one. Another one, which I know many of you are engaged in, are portfolios as assessment, right? A collection of evidence, the good, the bad, the ugly, where we sit with a student and they open up that portfolio and they talk us through it. Or we ask them some specific questions about the curriculum to surface some thinking so they can demonstrate along proficiency where they're at. I love samples and artifacts of student work. Posters, infographics, like some of the stuff we've been engaging in for, our entire career, and some of the stuff we've been overlooking. And now the ministry's saying, hey, I'd love for you to engage in this practice here. On the right side, student self-assessment, self-reflections, observations. You mean I could watch a student in learning, I could watch them have a conversation, and I could use that as evidence towards proficiency, that observation? Yes, we can. Right? We can watch a student on the land, engaging in nature, and we could use that as an evidence towards assessment. Two-way conversations? You mean I can have two students face each other and talk and observe that as evidence towards proficiency? Absolutely. Another piece that I love on this slide is how diverse these options are. Meaning we can't be a one-trick pony, right? We can't just be doing quizzes and tests. We have to be doing that, if that's what you value, if that's a valued assessment practice, and a whole bunch of these other things. The ministry is really proposing a diverse repertoire of assessment techniques. And I think this list, if I were to be honest, let's print it off and keep it near our teacher desk and think to ourselves, how can I engage in more of these practices more often? Erica, you're taking photos. Do I look okay in the photos? Is it okay? Did you get my good side?
He wasn't taking photos of you, just the slide.
I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. My students say the same thing. Mr. McKenzie, I wasn't taking a photo of you. I was taking a photo of the board. I say, don't let me be on your camera roll. This is really, really fantastic. This makes me joyous, joyful. Culturally informed assessment practices. Shut the front door. Right? So in being engaged in anti-colonial work, they're actually giving us language and liberated spaces to sit in those hard spaces, right? Like, it's hard to do that work. It's hard to be on a journey of reconciliation when we're in a system that takes power away from our learners. And they're giving us language to really reflect and sit more comfortably in this work. All assessment practices should foster holistic development of the whole person by honoring and incorporating their cultures and encouraging self-determination, self-identity, and self-actualization. Are you kidding me? Our government is giving us this space to hang our hat on this hard work. Culturally informed assessment practices allow students flexibility during assessment so that they can bring their own identities and fluencies into demonstrations of learning. Oh, meaning if I really value writing, but my student values learning, I need to honor that? You mean it's not my way is the best way? It's my students' identities and their cultures and their experiences need to be valued? Absolutely. So for those of you who have been engaged in this hard work, you're nodding your head and you're maybe saying, finally. For teachers who are not engaged in this work, this is a really clear parameter that they have to abide to now. You know what this language allows principals to do? It allows a principal to stand up in front of a school and say, we don't assess that way anymore. That's not equitable, and that's not honoring the identities of the people in the room. Finally, our ministry is giving principals some shoes to stand in and some teeth to have these conversations through. That's not a threat at all. That's like, I know you're engaged in the good work, my friends. And I know sometimes it's hard to do the good work because the person next door to you or the person down the hall is in contradiction to your good work. And now the ministry is saying, no, we all need to be on this boat together. Erica, what speaks to you with this particular slide? Sorry to put you on the spot. Partly it's to put you on the spot, partly it's to, invite your voice more because you've been taking photos of me.
I think what I was thinking immediately was that authentic audiencing and that lifting up the ability for students to present to who they feel, connected to in the learning. So, and then what the power of being an observer in that conversation would be for attendance or for us. Sorry. And then just thinking about that in the learning moments. So like, we know we have students who really shine, that's the skill set. So being able to ask some reflective questions kind of in the practical and experiential learning piece to connect for them, right? Really could leverage a different valuing of competence and capability.
Yeah. And being able to honor the brilliance before us, because now we are giving liberated space for us to see it, right?
Yeah.
I love the last few lines, friends. Look at the last few lines. Including students in the assessment process and co-constructing assessment criteria alongside them provides an opportunity for them to incorporate their heritage and community cultural practices in any evidence of learning. Isn't that beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it sensible? And I think of all those assessment structures that alienate students, that make the learning inequitable for students because it's just the way we've always done them. And now we have space to do something different. So when I saw this one, wow, you know what jumped out at me right away, Erica, and I'm sure it did too for you. I saw this book. I saw Joe's body of work. I saw this and I was like, ooh, it's so fantastic that we have such powerful voices that are supporting the vision from the ministry. Or dare I say, it's so amazing that the ministry's listening to such powerful voices and designing learning around people who have been yelling from the rooftops for so long for change.
I'll just say this kind of same as I do in some other book options. If you are somebody who has heard about that book and wants a copy of that book, if you reach out to me, I will purchase copies for us. It is a really, really great book to give us the kind of blueprint for actions to take for reconciliation. It's an anti-colonial, anti-racism book for practitioners in schools, and it really is a great read. So if you want one, put it in the chat or email me and I will add the list and order them up.
Who says no? Get at her. Get at Erica. It's like Santa Claus. It's Oprah. You get a book. You get a book. You get a book. Who says no? Who says no? You know, this is language I often use with my students because in my practice, I engage my students in a lot of the assessment realm. And we often talk about triangulating assessment. You know, my assessment lens, their assessment lens, and a peer's assessment lens. That's triangulation in my class, right? Trevor McKenzie version 1.0, 20 years ago when I started teaching, it was 1 point of assessment. Who was doing all the assessment? This guy. And now this triangulation allows for such an equitable and thoughtful reflective assessment experience. By including our students into this triangulation, they're much more thoughtful, self-aware, and they're actually honing these assessment skills. They're not complacent, they're active. And they're not complacent in a realm that traditionally has been void of student voice, right? By triangulating, they have a voice and a role in spaces that traditionally they didn't. So triangulation, usually, you know, I said teacher assessment, student assessment, peer assessment. In this circumstance, they're talking about observation, conversation, and product. Observation, conversation, and product for us to triangulate. When I say those three words, so I'll just repeat them. Forgive me, I know this is redundant, but I'm doing that teacher thing. Observation, conversation, and product. Which one of those is the most transactionary assessment practice? Is it observation? Is it conversation, or is it product? It's product, right? I assign, they produce, and they give it back to me. So by adding in these other two layers, we create less transactionary, more collaborative, and more informative. So we watch students, they watch each other. We have conversations with students, they have conversations with each other, and they produce products, tasks, assignments. But I'll tell you what won't surface in the product. What won't surface in the product are all the curricular outcomes. The curricular outcomes will surface as we observe learners in learning and as we have conversations with them. You're going to see in my gradebook what I mean by that. You're going to see products and you're going to see experiences in my gradebook and how these outcomes surface in both. So triangulation from teacher to student to peer, but also observation, conversation, and products. Here we go. Now we're talking assigning letter grades and percentages for those teachers 10, 11, 12 who live in the realm of both proficiency and letter grades percentages. This is nice to read. Throughout the term, teachers document evidence of learning by collecting student assessment and evaluating data. Yeah, okay, we're going to do that all term. Evidence of learning is not just physical work products, right? It's not just tasks, assignments, it's observation and conversation as well. Before reporting on student learning, the teacher reviews the entire evidence of learning, and then the teacher uses professional judgment to honor recent evidence and determine the overall growth. And that's how we give a letter grade or a percentage. The teacher reflects all the evidence, and we look at the most recent forms of evidence, and we choose a mark from there. You know, I don't stop there. You know, what does Trevor do? And what am I going to encourage you to do is to have conferences with kids and have a conversation where you're looking at that evidence together and you pick a number together. So I love that they're setting the stage for us to engage in that richer practice. They're not saying pick a number with your students, but I'm saying, can you confer with kids, look at all the evidence of learning together and ask them to self-assess. What mark would you give yourself? And can you get close? Can you agree on a number? I think that's really equitable. It's including student voice in an area, again, that has traditionally been void of student voice. So nowhere in this definition of assigning letter grades and percentages does it say enter in marks for every task and allow the platform to give you an average. It's saying look at all the evidence, consider the most recent form of evidence, and use your professional judgment to determine a mark. Pretty provocative, hey, Erica? Isn't that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely allows for subjectivity, you know, to be at least invited in as long as it's informed, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it also sadly creates room for bias, right?
Does.
And for blind spots. So, and I know I've said this to you, Erica, before, when I started conferring with kids and engaging in these conferencing structures, there were a couple kids that drove me nuts. There are a couple kids that I knew going into that conference, oh my gosh, I need to be my best self to give them a fair shake. And so I invited a colleague into those conferences, my neighbor, Lisa Green. I said, Lisa, could you watch me and give me feedback? So I am giving them a fair shake. So I'm checking my biases. And that was so helpful. For a couple semesters, we did that. And now I feel like I'm at a place where no matter how much the student drives me nuts, I know the questions I need to ask to get the conversation going. So that would be something that I encourage all teachers to do. If you're conferring with kids, invite a colleague in on the conversation to give you feedback so you are reducing your biases as much as possible. Schools I support that are engaged in this work, that's the first step. We don't confer with kids and do that unless we have a colleague in on it first. So let's go back to the previous slide, assigning letter grades, and then look at what it says here. Averaging marks over a term or a semester does not provide accurate picture of student learning. Learning's continuous. Therefore, learning demonstrated closest to the communication of student learning will be the most reflective of their proficiency. And it should be the strongest form of evidence to determine a letter grade or a percentage. So the ministry is saying, don't do that. Now a principal can stand up and say, don't do that. Now we can do some hard work, which is maybe doing a grade book that looks different, which I'm going to show you today a couple pages from a grade book that I've been tinkering with. There are all these little call outs throughout the PDF, and some of them are really good. Some of them like, okay, and some of them are redundant. Like, okay, you've said that 1,000 times. So due to the ongoing nature of learning, we don't average out. And again, learning demonstrated closest to the communication is valued more. So I know I just said that, but you know what our faculty is doing? We're actually creating a faculty handbook, and we're printing off all of these into our assessment section of our faculty handbook, just as nice reminders of what we do and what we don't do. So we create a faculty handbook for any new staff that are coming to our school and to ground us in common beliefs and common practices. And so these little call outs are a part of that faculty handout. I know. You're like, Trevor, why are you putting so much on a slide? There's a lot here to chew on, right? So now we're starting to talk about supporting students in the shift from letter grades to proficiency scale, because students have been used for a long time getting marks. Guess who else has been used to receiving marks? Parents. And parents, informing them of this new landscape of learning, it's a journey that we're on. It's a process of informing and including and inviting. And I love these bullets to help facilitate those conversations with students as well as with parents. It's not a teacher's job to do this heavy lifting alone. It is a school's job. It is a district's job. And it is the ministry's job, to be quite honest, to inform parents around this new landscape of learning and how we're communicating learning. I see a comment in the chat. The one challenge can be with curriculums that are discrete rather than continuous. If you don't mind unmuting and sharing some of your thinking there, just to bring some color to your thinking, that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, like, I think this can be sometimes curriculum dependent, because if you look at like an ELA curriculum and you're thinking about, like, to me, like proficiency in writing is more of a continuous outcome that you're looking at, right? So someone's skill in writing over a course, whereas like the way that the science curriculum is currently written in the NWT or in Alberta, I guess, is you have like 200 discrete outcomes that you have to measure. So you have 4 different units. And then if we're not averaging, like you have to kind of average it out, because you can't just take the most recent evidence because it's a discrete unit from the unit you started the year with, right? Like one unit's on population dynamics and then the next unit's on DNA, right? So that can be challenging. You can do it with certain skills when there's more focus on like, you know, the communication in science or like skills related to laboratories. But sometimes when you have like sort of discrete chunks of information, like
Yeah,
content
I feel
heavy
you.
courses.
I feel you. Who's
Yeah.
who's sharing right now? What is your name? So forgive me.
It's Deirdre from East 3 Secondary
Deirdre,
School.
love you so much. Thank you so much. And so yes, you're absolutely right. And this redesigned curriculum, the BC curriculum, is skill focused and not content heavy. There are fewer content strands and objectives, and it's much more skill heavy. And so what we call the skills in the BC curriculum, we call them curricular competencies. So you reference science, for example. There are sciencey skills, right? Skills that our science students need to learn, and they're cross-cutting across the whole course. The content is going to be kind of like the thing that is the vehicle for these skills, but the content is not the stuff that we're going to be assessing proficiency towards. It's the skills. So you're nailing it. It does cause us to transform how we assess and what we assess, because we're not assessing whether they know the DNA, blah, 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 blah. It's the skills as they learn the DNA that gets language and assessment and evidence towards proficiency. So you're nailing it. It's hard if, and so now that continuous thread of the skills across time, that's our new task. Does that make sense, Deirdre?
No, of course, and I like that much better. I just that's always been like, as someone who believes in the things that you're like in sort of honoring students' learning journey, and that they, you know, show growth over a year. It can be difficult when you're handcuffed to a curriculum that you don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
But it is nice to know that that BC curriculum focuses more on skills related to being like a scientific citizen than on just knowing facts, right? So yeah.
Yes, totally. And I'm glad that you feel you see the opportunity before us with this curriculum, that you know, you don't feel as handcuffed, right? Like perhaps if I could read between the lines, the current curriculum is handcuffing and the one coming your way is more liberating. Is that right?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that it's always been a thorn in my side to think about, you know, when you have, and I say 200 outcomes, I think it's like I think I counted, there were like 198 curricular outcomes for Science 10. And I was like, that's actually just, how does any student show proficiency in any of those curricular outcomes when like the pace of that course is basically like, do you know it or do you not know it today? Because we're moving on tomorrow to a new outcome.
Yeah.
but
And you know,
think
the old BC curriculum was similar to that, like 150, 200 outcomes. And I'm so thankful that you see opportunity in the new without even getting your teeth into it too deeply. Like we're really just getting started, aren't we, Erica, in terms of rolling this out?
Yeah, Trevor, I was going to ask, like, so, you know, I mean, there's a bit of a weird hybrid shift here, right? Like in terms of which grades are shifting and what's the freedom and all those things. So like for like high school where they're not shifting quite immediately, like what are some kind of tips and tricks and kind of hacks to shift like the thinking and the competency driven pieces and connect them with the content pieces, right?
Yeah.
Like in this bridgey time of sort of what are the assessment values and ideals and how make work in a curriculum with 200 outcomes.
Yeah. Oof. Do I have to, Erica? Why did you have to ask such a pokey question? No, I'm joking. You know, there are so many moves that I've seen teachers here in BC make before we've gotten to where we are now. You know, a big piece of the conversation with regards to doing things differently was really reflecting on the tasks, the products, and mapping backwards, what are the skills that are attached to that task? because the assignment in and of itself doesn't reflect all the rich skills. It's just like the final step that all the rich skills led them to, that led our students to. And so a big move that I've seen over the course of the last number of years is teachers backwards mapping tasks to the skills. And when I say the skills, we're talking the curricular competencies. So as we, depending on the rollout there, Erica, as we ask teachers to look at both, that would be a really healthy reflective practices. How do my assessments now actually unearth these skills as we get ready for that assessment, that product or that task? And then you know what naturally happens? Teachers are like, oh no, I need to do more in my instructional design to surface these skills. You know, the task isn't enough. I need to do a give one, get one. I need to do a questioning protocol. I need to do a provocation. I need to engage my kids in more conferencing. So the task, they begin to reflect on the process towards that task and realize that they need to add some things in there that work for their scholars. So I would say that would be a nice step to kind of, you know, wade into this kind of murky both lands, you know, the NWT curriculum and the BC curriculum. And then the second piece, I think that's a part of that one, Erica, is we really need to engage in more formative assessment practices. As we have a content heavy curriculum, like Deirdre's saying, right? A lot of content standards. It's really easy for us to get into a summative heavy culture of assessment. You said it, Deirdre. Do you know this today? Because tomorrow we got to move on. So I've got to do something today as a dipstick, a summative. I don't care about growth because I got to move on to the next thing. Well, as we continue to let go of that content and all those expectations, what do we need to pick up? We need to pick up a rich formative repertoire. So I would encourage teachers to start putting their toes in that water. What are formative assessments that will guide and inform my teaching and guide and inform the learning before me? Erica, anything come to mind specifically for you? Like, you know my work and you know the work I do with schools. Beyond those two, is there anything that comes to mind that you'd like me to speak to?
I was thinking too, like about how in the instructional design process, practitioners build in the spiral opportunities to really circle back and thinking about that idea of the most recent kind of ability to show confidence and growth and competence and growth. And then how do we build in that opportunity for spirality in a multi-outcome content heavy curriculum? And then what are the opportunities for unit synthesis? So sometimes you just got to teach the lab and break down the skills, and sometimes they need to know the piece because there's going to be a big summative at the end. And then other times, how do we create those like projects or units of design that allow for the synthesis of many outcomes in a single skill or in a single assessment practice, right?
Yeah. You know what I'd love, Erica? In a few slides, I'm going to show you a sample of the grade book. Can you ask me about spiraling when I have the grade book up? Because what I'm going to show you are a series of experiences and instructional design kind of protocols and a task. And if you bring up spiraling there, I'll be able to talk about that student's experience and how we literally spiraled around evidencing. Can you do that?
Yep.
Yeah. Perfect. Where was I with this slide? Oh, it was communicating to kids and parents, right? This new language of proficiency. Like, gosh, we hear from so many teachers, well, this is going to be hard because parents want a letter grade, or parents are going to come in and ask for a letter grade. In fact, we were at my youngest son's parent teacher night where all the parents come in at the start of the year and meet the teacher. And the teacher put up the proficiency scale on the projector screen. So grade 4 class. And a parent put up his hand and said, doesn't extending mean 4 out of 4? And doesn't emerging mean 1 out of 4? And the teacher had to say, no, it doesn't mean that. Actually, we're letting go of that. And these are the things we believe in. These are the things that we're doing. And it was so informative for everyone in the room. When the parent asked that question, I was like, oh my gosh, how is she going to handle this? Like, she could really say the wrong thing. And she said the most articulate, concise thing. And I think this language here gives us some of that language that we could use there in communicating with parents, community members, and students, what proficiency looks like, sounds like, and feels like, and why we're doing it, right? What's the intent and purpose behind proficiency? Writing descriptive feedback. Wow, feedback. feedback is a skill. It's you know, I hold up a couple books for you here. This is one called An Ethic of Excellence. What a boring cover that is, isn't it? An Ethic of Excellence. It's written by a dear friend, Ron Berger. Ron Berger also wrote Learning That Lasts, and another provocative title, Leaders of Their Own Learning. And Ron's body of work talks about really positive and helpful feedback. Like, how do we give feedback that sticks, feedback that helps? And Ron's 3 key characteristics to amazing feedback is that feedback needs to be kind, it needs to be specific, and it needs to be helpful. And I look at all this language and I'm like, gosh, it's totally aligned with best practice with regards to formative feedback. The ministry has done their due diligence, looked at what good feedback looks like and sounds like and feels like, and they're telling us here. It's evidence of learning, it's strength-based language, language that's easy to read for everybody, highlights significant areas of growth. Like, when I look at that, I just hear kind, specific, and helpful. Kind, specific, and helpful. I was on a webinar recently with Ron, and he said something that was so cool. He said 90% of the feedback we give kids should be in the affirmative. It should be in the positive, right? 10% should be the critique. 90%. Imagine what that does to your student's sense of self-belief. Imagine what that does for your student's sense of belonging and wanting to be in a classroom where 90% of the feedback we give them is, you're doing it. I see you doing this. This is amazing. 10% is critique, right? Ron talked about parenting. Like, if you're a parent, if you have a child, you know that you recognize and honor the behavior you want rather than identify the behavior you don't want, which is so hard as a parent, right? Like, don't kick your brother. Because what's he going to be recognized for? Kicking his brother. He's going to kick his brother more because that was the action that got a response. So 90% of the feedback should be in the affirmative. Yeah, I can definitely write the titles and authors of those books in the chat. Okay.
I'm just doing it for you now, Trevor.
Thanks, Ron Berger. And we can definitely email these out later, but I'll just read them off, Erica, because I know you have such magically fast typing fingers. The first one with the horrible cover was an ethic of excellence. Excuse me, an ethic of excellence. The second one was Learning That Lasts.
Learning That Lasts. Okay, yeah.
And then the last one, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Leaders of Their Own Learning. Leaders of Their Own Learning.
Perfect. Thank you.
You got it. And I'd be remiss, actually, let me stop sharing my screen here and just give me a moment because we're on the Ron Berger train right now, aren't we? There we go. I'm coming back to you. I just shared this out in my newsletter today and sent out 2 things in my newsletter today. And one was this link here. This link was the webinar I just referred to with Ron. It's a great conversation, albeit it's like an hour and 20 minutes of us talking about feedback. So if you can stomach me and Ron talking about feedback for an hour and 20 minutes, he's a master, he's a mentor. And every time I hear him speak, I just feel so grateful for his expertise and his empathy. Like,
Trevor,
talk about an empathy-driven assessment. Go
do
ahead.
you want to model the model of feedback reception? As your critical friend, you need to look at your blog post and put a exclamation point at the end instead of a 1.
Aw, my blog post. Okay, thank you. That was kind and specific and helpful.
I got your back. I was going to text you,
Aw.
but I figure you were probably busy this morning.
Exclamation point. Now I want to go do that right now. No, I won't do it right now. This is more important. Thank you for that. And you can text me feedback anytime. You're not micromanaging me. Okay. I love this. Again, you know, this would be something that we have added to our faculty handbook, right? As a reminder as to what great feedback looks like and things that we want new faculty to engage in at my school. So yeah, I do love this. What else we got here? Well, here's the proficiency scale. This is really simplified here. You know, they have a whole bunch of different images and documents, but this one I just felt captured the essence of where students can begin and where they could get to. And some of the language we could use in reporting. is beginning to, is working to, etc. So emerging is kind of the first level of proficiency or first phase, first identifier, developing, proficient, and extending. And again, I appreciate how they've given us a little bit of language here. Like, how do you communicate extending? Like, you know, how do you use words that let kids know where they're at? You can say that they're extending, but I love their 4 little stems per, right? Notice what proficient is. Proficient doesn't say is excellent at, is gifted at, you know, excels at. It's they're able to, they can, they're ready to move on, they're moving forward. So proficient's like they're doing it. They've demonstrated it. They can do it. So proficient isn't excellent. It's not like an unreal expectation. Think about that for a second. Students who get proficient means they can get an A, right? So all the, you know, understanding that we have about letter grades really gets thrown on its head when proficient is they're able to do it. That's our new A. Erica, when you did your land acknowledgement, you referenced something that was ever so subtle, but so powerful. You're on a journey of unlearning. Friends, in this work, we are unlearning. We have to let go of previous understandings of how to communicate learning, and we have to engage in new ones. Proficient means an A now. Finally, the ministry is giving it to us. It's like, finally, I'm just to zoom in, emerging, developing, proficient, extending, just so we can see some of that language. I think it'd be really healthy practice for faculties to write their own stems, right? Like add to, right? Yeah, this is language I give my students to reflect. Are you able to? How did you? How can you? How are you ready to? So I turn these statements into questions to invite my students into reflection. Again, another one of those call outs. This is a nice reminder for us. Classroom assessment and reporting should be formative and focus on student growth over time, right? So it's just like, yay, that's our job. You know, it doesn't say anything about letter grades, anything about percentages. It's like throughout the policy, it's just a nice, kind reminder. The purpose of assessment is for the people in the back, right? For the people in the back, there are all these little call outs. Okay, now we're cooking with gas. Okay. This is a sample page. This is my man, Danny. Danny is a rugby player. He's a senior. He's in my grade 12 English class. And all I've done, I'm not going to show you the background too much here, partly for privacy. All I've done is I've created these images in Google Slides. So my grade book is in Google Slides. This was something that was suggested to us by our Ministry of Education, or excuse me, our district assessment team, was do it in Google Slides because our current grade book, MyEdBC, does not support this. So they're saying for the time being, you could do it this way. I expect a revamp, a reboot of MyEdBC, our reporting framework, our attendance framework, that whole framework. They're going to do a reboot there. So in the meantime, I'm using Google Slides, and each student has their own slides. So Danny isn't in a grade book with Rebecca. Danny's got his own series of slides. I'm sharing these now with the students. At times I'm asking students to even self-assess, right? So this isn't just like housed to me where I'm doing all the heavy lifting. I say slowly in the last couple of months, I'm sharing this more with students and asking them to self-assess. Along the top, I've got competencies. I'll show you the competencies 1 through 8. Here are the ones that I've identified for this unit. This unit, I think these competencies are going to bubble up. This unit, these are the ones that, you know, intentionally I'm planning for. So I've chosen those competencies right from the curricular documents. I've copied and pasted them for me to see and for Danny to see. And so I've chosen 8. There are roughly 20 to 25 per course, right? So in this particular unit, 8 of those 20 to 25 are bubbling up. Going back to Danny, now you can see along the top, those are my competencies. And then down the left, I have a series of experiences, protocols, tasks, lessons, and some of which you'll recognize, like some of which you've been supported in using in your own classroom, like the skinny thick question continuum, the character wall, right? I showed you the character wall last time where I had those beautiful posters and someone had said, how does that lead to an assessment? Well, it's here so I could show you what it demonstrated. I did a thesis statement, give one, get one. We know the go-go, so I did a thesis go-go. I did a fishbowl writing conference where I met with 3 or 4 students and we looked at their draft writing. We peer assessed and we co-assessed. I did a one-on-one writing conference. I did a gallery critique where they all had to peer assess one another's writing. We did a co-design at the start of the unit with regards to exemplars where they co-designed success criteria with me. And then they did a self-assessment before they even turned in the task, before they turned in an essay in this particular circumstance. These are all the things that I did to get evidence of proficiency.
There's something in the chat there, Trevor, that relates there. It says, do you use a rubric or a list of criteria, or is it more based on professional judgment?
Oh, good question. For this, there's a list of criteria that we've co-designed, right? So for the big task, the essay, there's co-designed indicators. But what's fascinating is those indicators do not illustrate what means or what's going to surface in a skinny thick question continuum or what an effective go-go is, right? So that's why this slide here is really, really helpful. Students see that these are the things that we're looking as evidence towards using all those structures. So the point is, I need to make these curricular competencies kind of transparent for my students. So when you ask about the indicators, there are 2 things happening. There are indicators towards the task, and then there's this language, which essentially are indicators of what we're thinking about, gathering evidence towards. Now, do I take one of these and pick it apart and create indicators for each one? I could. I just have to really be mindful of the intent or the time I spend doing that. Is it going to garner the rich evidence that I need? Or is there an easier way to do it? Is there a more time effective way to do it? Does every curricular competency need a list of indicators? So I'll go back to this. You know, Erica, you asked that question about spiraling, right? There are a number of cells here that were empty, right? Where Danny didn't demonstrate competency number 1 in a particular activity or in a particular lesson for a number of reasons. Remember I said Danny's a rugby player? Guess what? Danny missed some days. So what do I have to do? I have to give another opportunity. I have to spiral back. Danny didn't demonstrate in some of those collaborative structures certain proficiencies, right? Partly because maybe he was shy, partly because maybe he was just listening that day and not giving me enough evidence, partly because maybe I didn't get to Danny that day, maybe because I was getting to other students who I was gathering evidence from. So the notion of spiraling and going back to gather evidence, there's not like a one dipstick day where everyone has to demonstrate proficiency on one day. It's let's map out this language and this evidence across a series of activities that I can continue to reflect on. I don't need evidence like 10 times towards one competency. I just need it once to demonstrate where they are. So, you know, for competency number 1, he didn't hit it a few times and all of a sudden he hit it once and he was proficient. And then I noticed it again and again and again in these other areas. I'm like, wow, it wasn't that I was hitting him over the head with the same task. I was observing him in several different learning experiences where the evidence was, oh yeah, he's proficient. He demonstrated in this and this and this. You could see certain areas where he was emerging at first, and then he was developing, and then he became proficient. Like look at competency number 5, for example. You know, when we did the exemplar co-design, that was actually one of the very first activities we did. So if this was in order, chronological order, that exemplar co-design down there in the bottom left, it would be at the top if this was in chronological order. And he actually was emerging at one point. And then later on, I gathered evidence of him being developing in that area. And then later on, he hit proficient, a few times. All students in this particular class have a similar Google slide with the same competencies along the top and the same activities along the bottom. That doesn't mean I can't personalize. Like if Danny was away for 3 weeks because he had a concussion and he missed all those tasks, can I call Danny up and do a one-on-one conference and ask questions for a whole bunch of these competencies? Absolutely, I can differentiate. So the spiraling that Erica, you asked me about, allows us to be equitable to all students given what's going on in their lives, Danny, his concussion, or their culture, their experience, their heritage. The spiraling, I think, is a key facet. Oh, this is so good. Blair's question, for report cards, what grade would I give if we're not averaging? So this is the report card conference that I'm referring to. So all of my students, Blair, and everyone in the room, we sit down, we look at their body of evidence. They bring in evidence of all these things that we've been gathering proficiency towards. And we compare this Google slide with that evidence. And I ask them a series of questions about their curricular competencies. And as they share, I actually write their report card comments about where they're proficient, where they're developing, what their next steps could be. So we write those comments together, meaning they have the questions in advance, they share with me and I type into their comments and I read them back to them, right? So do you agree? Is this okay? And then we choose a number together. I ask them, based on all this evidence, come to this meeting prepared with a letter grade and a percentage in mind. And then we agree on a number together. I have an idea of where they're at. Like if we were to look at all of Danny's letters here, is the dominant letter proficient or is the dominant letter emerging? If the dominant letter is proficient, Danny's in the A range. So I need to use my professional judgment to look at maybe the quality of Danny's work, maybe the quality of his learning. If I don't want to go there. I want Danny to be fulfilled. I want him to pick a number that he feels proud of. And if we can get in the range, because of what the data tells us, the range meaning plus or minus 5%, I'm pretty happy that we are assessment aligned. So in my class, we pick a number together. I know colleagues that take that ownership for themselves and they look at this data and they do, okay, Danny's mostly proficient, I'll give him an A. It's a big one, isn't it? In terms of subjectivity, bias. Remember, I suggested that we invite a colleague in. And this is where the ministry is saying, use your professional judgment and discretion. They are saying, look for the dominant form of or the trend in evidence though. Meaning like if the student is mostly proficient, then you should feel free to get into that A range. If they're mostly developing, you should not be putting that student in that A range. Now, again, this is only an important piece if you are that 10, 11, 12 teacher. If you're K to 9, you're going gradeless, so it doesn't matter. But if you're in that weird world of both 10, 11, 12, you've got to do both. Guess what I'm anticipating is going to happen in British Columbia? I'm anticipating they're going to go somewhat gradeless 10, 11, 12 in the next couple of years, which means by the time you are fully implementing there may be some liberation from some of those tensions you may be feeling right now. We may go percentage off the table and letter grades, right? So it may be A, B, C, D, or whatever, and percentages off, right? I don't know, but I know we're not going to stick with what we're sticking with now. You know, this walking in two worlds, so to speak.
Do you think that they're gonna, like, conversations at the post-secondary level are gonna get to an acceptance?
Yeah,
exploring?
Absolutely.
We're looking
Yeah.
for proficient, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know that those conversations are happening with post-sec right now across the country because, you know, our BC students want to go to other universities across the nation. And definitely looking at like not a portfolio, but like an actual admissions application that includes like responding to some questions, sharing some evidence of certain skills. And yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, higher ed is on the conversation or at that table for sure, Erica. I want to show you another one because I would say Danny and this English 12 class, although he did deal with a concussion quite literally, and I had to spiral back several times with Danny. He travels with a team outside of school, so he's away for sometimes days on end. I want to show you more of a differentiated example, like a really I would say inquiry infused example, something like more free inquiry, right? So I'm going to go to my girl, Odessa. And Odessa and I sat down yesterday, and this was all Odessa out of a conference. So Odessa's a senior. She's not attending class. She was brought to me in what we call Oak Bay Space. It's kind of like a flexible learning design program that I run at my school. And the majority of students come to me and we design learning together. So I ask Odessa something like, what do you want to learn about? Because these are all the curricular competencies, the content we can read, watch, study from your interests first. So what do you want to read or watch or do? And she says, I'm really big into philosophy. You know, I've read some Camus. I'd love to read some more. I said, really? So I didn't smack the novel on Odessa. She chose the novel, right? And then I asked Odessa, how would you like to demonstrate your learning? And she says, well, I'm pretty artistic. I'm pretty creative. So she chose this artistic representation. Then I said, okay, how are you going to track your learning as you go? How are you going to document and evidence so I can give you feedback as you go? So in that first conference, Odessa and I spent about 15, 20 minutes together co-designing a unit of inquiry. And yesterday, Odessa comes in and she says, I'm ready for my conference, my exit conference, where she has her piece of art. She has a sample of writing. And then what you see at the bottom there is you see some questions I asked her about the curricular competencies. So all I've done is I've looked at the curricular competencies and I've turned them into questions. So again, all those curricular competencies that Danny was exploring, I turned those into questions for Odessa, or I chose different ones based on Odessa's plans, right? Odessa was doing this, this, and this. So I grabbed competency, and she knew she was going to have to speak to these questions. So this was so powerful for Odessa and I. All I did in our conference was ask her these questions, and she said the darndest things. And in my grade book, I was listening for emerging, developing, proficient, extending. And so under these questions, that's all I wrote is, yeah, she demonstrated that in this conversation. It wasn't even in the task. It wasn't in the form of art. The form of art is like the wallpaper for her speaking about her learning. In a 20-minute, and you know, at first Odessa was like really tentative. And I said, Odessa, my friend, you can't say the wrong thing. I'm not assessing what you say. I'll continue to ask questions, listening for your evidence of these curricular competencies. So don't worry, this isn't a presentation. It's a conversation where if I continue to ask you questions, it's because I'm trying to bring up some thinking from your learning. And so she felt really safe. Like she didn't have to read from a script, right? And the conversation was quite fluid. She had these questions before she came in. The bookended questions, the first one and the last one, were really just icebreakers and exit kind of questions. The first one's, tell me about what you read and why you chose these things and what you created. Like, let's get the ball rolling. And then the last one was, if I missed anything, right? Is there anything else you'd like to share with me? Is there anything else that, did I miss anything? Did I not honor you? And all those questions in the middle, again, I looked at the curricular competencies and I turned them into a question. So let's look at what that looks like. This is Odessa's grade book. This is Odessa's page. She did a pitch with me. Remember that first conference where she pitched me her idea, like Dragon's Den, right? She sits with me and she pitches her idea. Across the competencies, she was emerging. Like literally, she was emerging in that little conference at the start. She got my approval. Like I was like, okay, your pitch is approved. Let's get going on learning. Then we had a series of ongoing conferences where Odessa, come in and sit with me for 5 minutes. Let's talk about your progress. Odessa, sit with me and tell me about this competency. How's it coming along? Competency number one, do you love learning? Do you love reading? Is there an enjoyment for text? The very first conference we had, she demonstrated that. So she went from emerging to proficient like that. Other ones, she was developing across time. So I was just spiraling back in the conferences with these questions, looking for evidence of these competencies. The artistic piece, that little painting, that collage, really, she only demonstrated 2 competencies, but the one-on-one conference, she demonstrated all the competencies to proficient. So what do I give her as a mark? I give her an A because she demonstrated proficient in that final conference. I raise that example up because it's not an essay, right? It's not like me hitting the kids with an essay. It was me actually designing something one-on-one with a student, me continuously having one-on-one conversations with a student. And then us getting to a place where in that last conversation, we revisit those curricular competency questions and all the thinking emerges, and Odessa demonstrated proficient. If she didn't demonstrate proficient and she demonstrated emerging, that doesn't mean she's a failure. That means the reporting says she's emerging, right? Does that mean she fails the class? No, that just means she's emerging. Fascinating. So I bring up Odessa. It happened yesterday. I was like, I can't wait to share this in my conversation with the newbies tomorrow. And again, I just really want to lift up that the questions I asked Odessa were curricular competency questions. I took these right from the curriculum. So I know I opened up like a big, not a can of worms, but a really different way of assessing, a different way of what a grade book looks like. I think this is a great place for you to consider getting into it eventually. Erica, you referenced, being in the NWT curriculum and the BC coming down, the pipe soon and being on your plate soon. This is going to be a great addition to the assessment repertoires, a grade book such as this, unless there's something else created locally that may be better suited to your context. Erica, any comments or questions from you?
I know those conversations are definitely happening. Like I was in a conversation the other day about gradebook and how that works, and how that works with the proficiency scale and percentages and all those things. So those conversations are definitely happening. I don't think they have a resolution as such yet. I think they're just in the conversation stage. I did have a question, and it doesn't necessarily espouse my assessment beliefs and the disconnect between high school and post-secondary. However, like, what is the conversation for students like Odessa who make a choice to enter a really systemic institution that the experience you had isn't available?
Yeah. Well, Odessa, well, that's a question I had with Odessa was, do you plan to go to university? Right. And she's like, that's a door I'd like to have open for me one day. So we were actually planning learning experiences to help that door remain open. The reflection of her assessment there does not determine whether that door is open or closed, right? Like, that grade book is not the thing, but it's the type of learning experiences that she may encounter later. I wanted to make sure that she had some experience in now. So things like, well, if you want to go there, I'd love for her to choose a complicated text, right? Like, and she chose Camus. Like, okay, so, the fact that she was interested in keeping that door open was reflected in a choice that she made, right? If she didn't choose that text, I would have nudged her towards choosing a more complicated text. Or I would have asked her, like, what program would you like to go into one day? And I would try to create some conditions for her to experience now safely that allow her to understand what that could be like later. But what I really despise, that's a strong word, is when teachers say, I'm getting my kids ready for university, and that's their excuse for bad practice, right? Like, I'm getting my kids ready for university, so I have to give them tests, when really the ministry's saying diversity. Guess who has to change? The university has to change. And they are, slowly they are. Portfolios, summatives look different. Galas showcases are happening more. So I guess my short answer is, Erica, is it needs to be a conversation with the individual scholar to map out a learning pathway that suits their goals and aspirations and desires for their lives, rather than what I assume to be what they should have experience in. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. It's a soundbite.
It's a Trevorism. Okay, we have a half an hour of Trevor time left, so there may be a little bit of action that happens without me, Erica, but what I wanted to do was show the BC curriculum ever so briefly, because I've been talking a mean game about curricular competencies and planning with curricular competencies in mind. And so what I'm going to do, and I know some of you are familiar with this, this is just the curriculum landing page. You could Google BC curriculum and here it is. And you can see by subject area, it's broken up by grade level. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the English teacher thing and take you right to the course I'm teaching with Danny and Odessa right now. And so when I click on English Language Arts 12, I see some options. So just to be clear, this may be a little bit confusing, but in British Columbia, we have some electives as options now for English 12. So instead of just taking standard English 12, you have to take that. And you can also take like a composition course, a creative writing course, a spoken language course. This is dependent on student need and student interest, I should say, when they create their course application, right? So we survey the kids, and if there are a whole bunch that want an elective course, we run it, we staff it, right? But the one that they all must take is this one with the star, English 12. And so I'm just going to open up the PDF so we can have a peek. And it's a 6-page PDF, which is kind of neat. Like the entire English course is summed up in 6 pages. And I know this looks boring and stuffy, but you know, it really is helpful with how it's laid out. And I'll make some connections to how it's laid out beautifully to inquiry-based teaching. So we have a description of the course at the top, but I'm going to scroll right down to the layout. So the first piece I want to identify is there are 3 components to the course. And then external to the course is what we call the core competencies. So each course has 3 components. And then as well in the curriculum, we have the core competencies. The core competencies kind of wrap around all the courses. Remember, those are those critical skills all students are nurturing. And then in each course, we have the big ideas, we have the curricular competencies, and we have the content standards. Can everyone look at those right now? Can you identify them? You know, if we were really like grade 3 teachery, I'd ask you to put your finger on each one and identify them. Erica, what was your comment or question?
I was just gonna say, and like update for the peeps about the core competencies of BC and the NWT key competencies. There is work being done right now in a working group at the territorial level to basically create a hybrid of those. So to absorb the BC core competencies within the NWT key competencies. So,
and it's so nice that the NWT key competencies are kind of synonymous, hence the bringing together, right? So when we're thinking of this curriculum, we can make some connections to the key competencies. Would you agree, Erica?
yeah, they're very aligned. They're just some uniquely kind of, I would say, really in the bent of reconciliation, really in the bent of power and privilege and living well together that are really unique to the NWT key competencies and that are really explicit. And so I think the goal is to keep those and make sure that the core competencies align where they fit within the key competencies.
Such necessary work, right? That is the good work. So each course has 3 components: big ideas, curriculum competencies, and content standards. Deirdre's comment earlier about, 200 NWT content standards. Each course has fewer content standards than that, a lot fewer, like 20 to 30 at most, right? Additionally, each course has curricular competencies, which are skills specific to a subject area. Like our curricular competencies in English 12, guess what they are? They're Englishy skills. We want our students to be thinking like writers, to be thinking like through that vein of skill set. The science curricular competencies, guess what? They're sciencey skills. The math curricular competencies, they're mathy skills. The big ideas, these are concepts. I love concept-based teaching and planning. We know in inquiry, we value skinny and thick questions, right? We value the close and the open. The thick, the open, that's the conceptual. The most innovative curricula design around the world is conceptually framed. It's not topical, i.e. Deirdre, 200 topical outcomes, right? Now we have less topical outcomes and they fit under these broader, bigger concepts. These broader, bigger concepts are kind of like the big intent of a unit or the goalposts of a unit of inquiry. You can see in this course, there are 6 big ideas. So I see some teachers saying, okay, those are 6 units that I have to teach. But gosh, these big ideas, they're not siloed, they can be brought together. So like for me, Odessa actually demonstrated a couple big ideas. She actually was looking at, number 1, the exploration of texts. She was looking at number 2, people understand text differently, etc. Number 4, questioning what we read, hear, etc. Number 3, language shapes ideas. Like all these were intentions or directions that her learning took us. Definitely, she didn't do the 5th box, the examination of her First Peoples culture. Like she read a Albert Camus, hello, like no. Nothing in there that surfaced in her learning connected to. Maybe I could have assigned that, right? I could have said, could you compare and contrast this text with this text, or this philosophy with this belief system? I could have to have that big idea bubble up, but I didn't. Because in another example with Odessa, maybe it comes up. When I was showing you Danny and all those curricular competencies along the top, 1 through 8, here they are on the left. I just scraped them right from here. So there are comprehend and connect. That's Englishy language. And then on the second page, there are create and communicate skills. That's it. So just to be clear, there are only 2 pages of those bullets. The other stuff down below, it's elaborations and more descriptive language. These first 2 pages are most simplified what we have to teach and assess. The content standards on the other side, you know what I don't see anywhere on the other side? I don't see that I have to teach Shakespeare. I don't see that I have to teach Andy Warhol. I don't see that I have to teach a specific text. So when it comes to the content standards, I'm going to beg of you, make it local, make it contextual, and plan with your students' interests and identities and heritage in mind. Why would we do it any other way? So when we look at strategies and processes, reading strategies, oral language strategies, metacognitive strategies, it doesn't say I have to use Shakespeare for that. Again, incredibly liberating. And for some colleagues, it's going to create some fear. Like, I've always taught Shakespeare. What do I teach now? That's where the good work that's been happening at BDEC to create resources and exemplars and have coaches come in and design things differently with teachers, and the work that you've been engaged in, right? It doesn't have to be the way that we've always done it. It could be designed with people in place in mind first. Erica, I'm going to assign some thinking now, some homework to the group. This will be a lot of fun. I think it's fun, so we'll see. And when I say thinking and homework, this is the action time now for you all. So I'm going to ask you, we'll probably mute our mics for a few minutes, and maybe I'll get another cup of coffee like I need it. We'll mute our mics for a couple minutes, and you're actually going to, friends, you're going to Google the BC curriculum, and you're going to come to this page, okay? And I want you to choose something relevant to you. So, you know, if you teach grade 3, choose a subject area, curricular area that you want to open up. If you're teaching grade 10 science, open that up. So number 1, Google BC curriculum, come here and choose something that you want to open up and have a look at. For me, I opened up English 12, right? So this is my PDF. This is where I'm working. You know what I'm really interested in is I want you, just as I asked Erica to consider a next step to be, pick a task, pick a product that you assign kids, pick an assignment that you do. And I want you to compare that assignment to the curricular outcomes on the left. And what, in preparation for that task to be turned in or spiraling feedback towards, which skills bubble up as the breadcrumb trail to that task. So BC curriculum, find something of relevance, think of a task that you engage in, a unit, and then I want you to go down and pick the curricular outcomes that are going to bubble up in anticipation or preparation of creating that task, creating that product. We are going to ask you to share out. So, you know what I'd like to do is give everyone about 8, 9, 10 minutes to look at the curriculum. If you're in a room, do it together. And eventually what we're going to do is we're going to unmute our mic and we're going to say, hey, I teach grade 3 and the task I chose was, and the curricular competencies that I think are attached to that are. Just to be clear, those were sentence stems, right, Erica? Right? I teach this, the task I chose was this, and the curricular competencies I identified are.
I'm gonna stick those in the chat just to
You're
organize.
amazing.
our
You're
thing.
amazing.
So task,
Yeah,
competencies.
I think our team here has a question if there's time for that.
There's definitely a question for time. Yeah, go ahead, Deirdre.
That's not my question. Maybe Jill or Megan had a question.
I can pose the question and we're just wondering, so and this is Erica as well, will there be separate reporting on core competencies and content specific competencies? And I'm talking about under learning standards on the thing showing where it says students are expected to know the following. So are we going to report on those separately?
Yeah, that's a great question. Erica, could you just reserve your response and I'll tell you what's happening in BC?
Yeah.
In British Columbia, the reporting is focusing on curricular competencies and not content standards. So in BC, the report card comments and definitely evidence of, the content shapes, the mark per se, but it's not in the proficiency language.
Sorry,
It's all focusing on curricular competencies.
I think she means
Okay.
the cores.
Yeah, I mean the core, like at the above the big ideas, the core competencies.
Yeah. So in this particular curricular document, there actually isn't anything that pertains to the core competencies. What we'll do is we'll go back to the curriculum and let me see here. I'm going to go to competencies right here. And everyone can see this right now, right? And then here are all of our core competencies. They're communication competencies, thinking competencies, and personal and social. This is actually separate from the reporting, from teacher reporting. This is what we get students to self-assess and reflect on. Schools are giving students little templates and little guiding questions to continuously self-assess and reflect on. It does get stapled to the report card, but it's student self-assessed. Whereas the stuff that I showed you in this is all teacher assessed and teacher feedback.
I think it's gonna be fairly similar. I think things that have been thrown around and I don't like, it isn't official and it isn't out yet by any means. And I don't think it's done because I think the assessment working group is still working. But in the core competency, key competency group is still working, but it's either sounding like a learner profile,
Yeah.
which isn't like assessed grade wise or percentage wise, that's just attached to the report card, or a student kind of input version of that, right? So it really does feel like key competencies, core competencies are going to be developed at like in relation to assessed skills, but will be a part of classroom practice.
And so in our school, our students all do their self-assessment and core competency documentation in their homeroom. So several days a week, they go see their homeroom teacher. And throughout the year, they are spending some of that time reflecting on all of their classes and all of their experiences in school and outside of school to think about and document evidence towards the core competencies. My responsibility as the English teacher is to lift up the core competencies when I see them bubble up in my lesson design. Like, hey kids, that thinking competency, did we do that today in that thinking routine? Absolutely. In homeroom tomorrow, if you're asked to gather evidence and self-assess, that activity could be a good place for you to do so. Am I grading it? Am I assessing it? Am I giving feedback on it on my report card comment as an English teacher? Absolutely not. I hope that makes sense. I know there's a lot of muddy waters for us to wade through, and the clear questions are very, very helpful. And if we're not making sense, if we're not helping unmuddy the waters, just continue to say, yeah, but help me a bit more, because I'd be happy to. Erica, did you have a chance to throw those questions in the chat?
I didn't. I wrote them down, or I got some of them down. Tasks, competency.
Yes.
I couldn't remember what the last one was.
Yeah, so can you identify the subject that you teach? Like, hey, I teach grade 3,
Yep.
and then tell me the task that you're going to share out, and then the curricular competencies that are going to bubble up
Yep.
as we get towards that task. Just
Okay.
as I did with Danny. So Danny's task was an essay, but all those things that were fundamentally formative assessments towards that task were where those proficiency evidencing opportunities surfaced. So if I
Yeah.
were to say Danny, I'd say, hey, I'm an English 12 teacher. My task is an essay. And these curricular competencies bubbled up in this thinking routine, in this, one-on-one conference, in this character wall conference. I kind of want a map of the landscape there. Again, what we're going to do, Erica, we'll give them 8 minutes, 10 minutes. So we'll come back on at about 25 after, 27 after. I'll say a few transitionary words, and then sadly, it will be you. Okay.
Sad or happy for me.
Exactly. Enough Trevor talk. Okay, we'll give you that time now, friends. Enjoy.
Sorry to interrupt you guys, this quiet thing, but CPNS, I know you have an assembly. It starts at 11:30, I'm assuming. So maybe we'll just come back together at like 11:26. That way you guys can share before you go. Will that work? Thank you.
Erica, where was that typo on my website? Come on now.
Oh, It was in the newsletter that came, or in the writing part that came in the newsletter. Came in my email this
Can't
morning.
fix that. Oh, I can't fix that. I thought it was on my website. The newsletter sent, it's going to have to, that's okay. It's modeling vulnerability.
Mhm, that's right.
Dang it.
Almost imperceptible.
Almost, but not quite. Thank you.
It was really just the opportunity to model the model.
I think it's about that time, Erica. What do you think?
Absolutely. All right, CPNS, you are up.
Thanks, guys, gals, friends, peeps. What do you got?
Oh, our video's not starting. Oh,
Oh,
there
hi.
it is. Okay.
So we are just talking about like a whole school inquiry project we did, and actually Erica was here with our school working with us, which was awesome. So as a whole school, we did focus on stories, which kind of connected to our Dene curriculum as well, because it was like talking about stories told from being on the land from the students' perspectives. So each class kind of had their own task and what they wanted to focus on for curriculum connections, but we're just gonna talk about ours. Do you want to explain yours?
Sure. Erica was very heavily involved in my class. We first listened to Gwich'in legends and traditional stories in the language, and then I transcribed them into English. We went over them that way as well. Our access point for the kids, after that, we were focusing on summarizing main parts of the story. So our first access point was to have students draw pictures of the key parts of the stories. We extended from there and had students add words to the bottom to describe what was going on. Yeah, and then we went from there. Morgan?
Yeah, and so then Taylor teaches grade 4, 5. I'm 6 through 9. So mine's kind of just like enhancing that a little bit. So my class focused on fractured fairy tales as well as legends. So we did the same thing of like really working on our summarizing skills, putting it onto a story mountain, identifying the intro, climax, resolution. And their task was to now read that, make a choice from a fractured fairy tale or a legend and do a perspective, do a different perspective of that story or legend and putting it on a story mountain. And then the students orally presented their story mountain and told that story, and we were able to turn those into QR codes, which was really neat for sharing. So that's what we did. For the sake of time, we did grade 6 curricular competencies for our presentation right now. So we focused on grade 6 English, comprehend and connect. And the two that we focused on was apply appropriate strategies to comprehend written, oral, and visual texts, guide inquiry, and extend thinking. And then the other one we chose because Taylor focused on the Gwich'in stories and I was focusing on also different legends, Gwich'in legends. We did recognize, appreciate the role of story, narrative, and oral tradition in expressing First Peoples perspectives, values, beliefs, and points of view. So those were the ones that we focused on.
That's so cool. I love you guys. Thank you for getting us started. And friends, just from their sharing alone, I think what we really, and you weren't demonstrating anything redundant. So I'm not saying you were doing anything redundant, but you know what's going to happen when we look at our tasks that we currently engage in and when we look at the new curriculum, we're going to see that we have a lot more space to explore these skills when we let go of things that we don't need to do anymore. Right? Like there are certain tasks that we may be asking our kids to do that actually don't surface the skills that are valued in the new curriculum. So as we continue to think about how tasks should surface skills, let's get interrogative about, do we need to do the same things anymore? It's a big question, isn't it? You weren't demonstrating that at all, but I was thinking of all the rich description that you were bringing to your unit. I was thinking, oh my gosh, how many skills should be bubbling up there? There should be a lot. Like how liberating for you to know that you're already doing that. For some colleagues, it's actually the task doesn't bring out much. Maybe I should do something different. That's going to be a hard reflection, isn't it, Erica?
Yeah, I was going to say for you ladies, I know you need to go, but did the pathway that we chose allow learners to go deep? Did they have a lot of opportunity to learn, practice, and demonstrate those skills?
I think the most complicated part about this specific unit, because it was such a rich unit for us to focus on, is just that it was right before spring break. So unfortunately, it did kind of get cut a little bit short at the end just because of our time. But I do think that with the time that we had with the students, they really were able to develop a lot of skills meaningfully. They were able to focus on those specific skills that we had outlined for them and really get into them a little bit more than we would normally be able to in just like a regular activity. And I think because it was a whole school topic, we were able to connect not only with our own learners in our classroom, but also to all the different stages of learning throughout the school, which I thought was really valuable for our students.
Awesome.
And for my class, I thought they did because also I'd connected to more than just my English. Like I ended up giving my students fractured fairy tales and legends, and I think only one kid chose a fractured fairy tale. All the kids chose these legends, and the perspectives they wrote about connected to their own lives as well. Like they were able to bridge the connection from the text and also from the personal experiences. When they wrote these different perspectives, they were drawing on connections they already had built because a lot of it was based on like land and place. And then like even talking about perspective writing, you know, like they were able to think about perspectives in health class. Like what is it like to think about being in someone else's shoes, you know? So I do think they got a lot out of it. And the part that I thought they got the most out of is when they had to orally present. Like it's one thing to get your ideas on paper, but then when they had to orally present to me and we videoed them, they started going deeper thinking, like more than what they actually had on their paper. And it was kind of neat to see that spiral. It was neat.
That is
I
so
also thought
cool.
it was- Sorry. I also thought it was just like a really valuable activity for us to do, especially in my class with Erica, because we watched videos of elders from local, like from Siggetchik and from Fort McPherson, present these stories in Gwich'in. And it was actually some of my students' like great grandparents. And so the connections to not only the story, but the people sharing the story really helped our students like connect to that. And I think that like that was able to like push them forward with the activities and with the stories themselves. They were so focused and they were so like diligent in their work because they were able to make that connection not only with like a relative of theirs, but like that story that was shared.
And pride, eh? Like
Yeah.
pride with their family sharing those stories and
Yeah.
pride that they get to work on it.
It was
Yeah.
awesome.
I'll
You
see you
guys are
lady.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually have to go. We have an assembly.
Yeah, I
go, go, go.
apologize.
That's why we're
Thank
saying
you
you
guys
guys
so
are great.
much, eh?
Go. Get out of
Yeah.
here.
Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you both. Bye now. Erica, so one question in the chat that was just sent to me as a direct message from one of our colleagues was just to revisit the rule of thirds that I brought up, and it was from our colleague Dylan Williams. Dylan is a formative assessment consultant, author, researcher. And Dylan proposes kind of this rule of thirds. So a third of the feedback we give in class could be to the whole class. So feedback to everyone, right? A third of the feedback we give should be one-on-one, and a third of the feedback should come from peer-to-peer. So if we think of the time we spent engaging in feedback, a third to the whole class, a third one-on-one, and a third peer-to-peer. I did reference as I was sharing my thinking around Dylan's rule of thirds. That only works if our students can peer assess effectively. And what does it mean to peer assess effectively? They need to peer assess for kind, specific, and helpful. Like their feedback needs to be kind, specific, and helpful. If not, it's going to be a waste of time. Like I'm peer assessing with Erica and I say, good job. Like, does that help Erica? Does that propel her learning? That does nothing. It's a waste of time. So that third is not fruitful. It's only fruitful if we coach for kind, specific, and helpful, which was Ron Berger's work. Erica, as I begin to excuse myself from today's session and let you, come back more into the space after Trevor's time, I'd love for you to share, Erica, any context that you can give me from the sharing that our colleagues engage in now. A task and curricular competencies. That would be helpful if you can just share a few anecdotes with me as homework, and then the show and share. We didn't have time today for you to share any of the show and share, so I'm kindly gifting that to you to talk a little bit about. Is that okay?
Well, and it's gonna all kind of be connected to that kind of like final show and share, right? So like if we didn't
Perfect.
today, it's gonna be part of the narrative for the end of the month that just sort of says, where are we as a network? What did we do? How did we get here? Right?
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you have warmer weather, friends. Enjoy the weekend, TGIF, and thank you for your commitment to this work. We'll talk really soon. Thank you, Erica.
Bye, Trevor. Thank you.
Bye, friends. Take care.
So despite the fact that Trevor had to go, we will share as a network together, just sort of that little piece that you just did. So if you'd like to unmute and volunteer to go first after Siggetchik, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll call along the screen.
All right.
Hi, everyone. I teach grade 5, and as part of our science unit, we're learning about simple machines and forces. So the task that I chose was building an elevator out of recycled materials, and the students will have to build the elevator and also be able to lift a load of a specific weight. So some of the curricular competencies in the BC curriculum would be looking at planning and conducting an experiment. So students will have to decide a variable that they should change and be measured for a fair test. So in this case, they'll be deciding like the different parts of their elevator, what should be changed in order to lift the load. And they'll also have to observe, measure, and record data. So they'll be looking at their design element as well as the weight of their load that they're lifting. Another aspect is looking at evaluating. So that's a crucial part of their design. So what did they change from their initial design to what was their final product in lifting their load, and identify some sources that they changed and why they changed it.
Thank you. How was that process, Amy? Like, was it easy to choose the task and then map it back?
Well, this is something that I have planned in mind. We haven't gotten quite yet to it, so it's making me think for the future. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing.
Hey.
Hello.
We're Boosters, welcome to, or not welcome, but not inviting us into it or interrupting anybody, but we're happy to share our experiences and our analysis of the BC curriculum. Melanie and I, a little while back, we did, so Melanie teaches upper elementary and I teach middle school English, and
so 4, 5, 6, and grade 9.
Yeah, and so we did a collaborative unit together where we brought the classes together. It started off looking at just various forms of kind of fantasy, like fables, legends. Yes, just kind of looking at the differences between those. We looked at a lot of local creation stories, both oral and written examples. And then we had the students develop their own. And then we had the students get together and design and perform one of the stories, the story of when Beaver creates the land. They turned it into a video that was animated and acted out.
These puppets and shadow acting, like we used like a curtain, and we had like, because they didn't really want to act, so we kind of catered it more to, like, I guess, their interest, and like they were all like shy and didn't want to perform, I guess. So we used like a white sheet, and we just a silhouette. We had a light shining behind them, and then we had like the animals, which was cool.
I don't mean to interrupt you at all. Just in terms of like thinking about that project, I'm hopeful that we'll get to see that in the kind of show and share at the end of the month there. So that sounds like a fantastic connect for sure. In terms of the task that you chose, is that sort of retelling of the story?
So there were multiple tasks involved, like multiple assessments involved in this. It was about a month long, and it involved everything from them being able to analyze texts, to creating their own text, to turning text into a dramatic piece. Creating. Yeah. And so when we look at the BC curriculum, we just kind of picked in between. We chose a grade 7. Something like this can be applied to a variety of grades as we did, but we chose grade 7 because it's kind of in between both of our grades. And we found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 different competencies between the comprehend and connect and the create and communicate.
Which is amazing. And then you could decide kind of where you want to go deep, go shallow, right? Like just expose, and then you're going to do that again, and then where you're going to cycle back and where you're going to really put that weight in. So, and where students really think that they shone, right? And that whole be able to differentiate a little bit about what we're assessing according to student need and interest and desire, right?
Like when we think of the production was kind of, I think, one of the hardest parts for the kids, because not a lot of them had that confidence. And so we had different roles where kids were, you know, designing and doing the art aspect. Others were performing, others were reading and recording their voices. So kind of catered to their individual strengths.
Yeah.
Awesome.
They each were able to like create something in their own way that kind of still showcase something.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see that sort of developed in your end of the month showcase. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thank you.